So here is a more short stacked hand, 20, what is that, 26-ish big blinds. Flat in the big blind, check call a flop, pretty standard. Turn, check check. So we river the nuts. I think that, again, this is another spot where when we lead the river, I don't expect to like get called by one pair hands basically ever, by betting a reasonable size. I also expect that most of his flushes will bet when checked to. So I check the river, he pots it, and obviously we just jam, and he bet folds half his stack for full pot on the river. Flat in the big blind with pocket fours, check call this flop. This is played against a friend of mine, so we do have a bit of history and kind of understanding of each other's game. So I check call the flop, he's going to be c-betting very wide. Turn check check, and I basically like to check raise the river. On an ace high board, I'm basically not going to check raise many flush draw combos, and he especially knows this. So, and also I know that he's going to bet probably all of his flush combos on the turn, all of his strong hands on the turn. So this is kind of a perfect spot to check raise the river, and I end up getting him to fold. Here's another example of a river check raise for value. I check call the flop with trips here. Turn comes an ace. Not a great card for me because I'm pretty perceived to check call with ace high. So for that reason, I'm going to check the river here, try and make my hand look like 5x or something weak. I do expect him to bet any ace if he did check the turn. And I think he might try and even thin value bet with king x once I check twice. So he pots it, and I jams, and he folds. Another example of a value check raise. I flat with queen 6 suited. Check call with my flush draw plus overcard. Turn completes my flush, and it goes check check. So the river comes a king. Again, this is another spot where I basically just have like no error in my range. It's a spot where anything that he's going to call a bet with, like king x or jack x if he checked it on the turn, he's going to bet himself. So just another classic check raise spot. Put in the check raise, and he folds. So here's a good example of a check raise bluff. So I check call the flop here with pair plus flush draw. Turn comes a 9, which pairs the board, and he checks back. This player is a regular who I have a lot of hands with. So when he checks the turn, I think he's going to bet most of his jack x and 9x on the turn. So I check the river, just hoping to show down my hand, but once he bets, especially when he bets half a pot, I basically think that he probably just has an ace here, maybe a jack that he didn't bet on the turn. I also think that this is a spot where I have like every 9x combo. I wouldn't check raise any of my 9s on the flop, and obviously wouldn't fold them. The question is whether I check them on the river. And I do think I would check raise my 9x on the river, and the reason I think that is because I expect him to bet his his jack x on the turn, and he's going to bet an ace on the river anyway. So I think check raising will be best with 9x. So I also think it's good to check raise with some bluffs. And yeah, so I check raise, but he actually did check a 9 on the turn, which I think is pretty bad, to be honest. Too much value out there from straight draws, flush draws, hands like mine, and jack x. Here is another fun hand against a reg. I flatten the big with jack 8, float with 2 overs, backdoor straight draw, backdoor flush draw. Turn increases my equity. The turn spot, I think, is going to be another call. I think he's pretty likely to bluff on a jack, definitely. He's also going to keep betting, obviously, his value hands. And he on a straight river and stuff like that, he'll bet some thin hands. I think he might try and bluff on a 4 straight river as well. So I think that turn calling is pretty close there, but I think that, well, I did elect to do it. And the river comes to 6, which is a good card for me. I'm very perceived to have that. He's going to bet all of his 7x here, I'd assume. Might bet some bluffs. Also, this is pretty much the worst hand I can get to the river with. Jack high, and generally you can turn the bottom of your range into a bluff. So I do just that, and I get the fold. So here is a cool hand with a slightly different line. So here I check, the flop checks through, sorry, after I flat pre. The turn I lead on. I think that this is a good spot to lead because he's going to have 2x, ace-x, stuff like that, pocket pairs a lot, and he's going to call those, also some diamonds. So I lead for value, and then the river comes an ace. I think that when he checks the flop, he's very unlikely to have a flush draw. He's also quite unlikely to have an 8 because firstly, a lot of people bet it on the flop. Secondly, 3 of the 4 8s are in play, so there's card removal there. And I also think he's very likely to have ace-x that he checks the flop with and calls a turn with. And I also think he's very likely to bet ace-x. I don't think that he probably well, maybe he shouldn't bet ace-x, but most people do in my opinion. So that's why I elected to check raise the river, because if he has ace-x, he'll bet it anyway, so I get more bets in with the check raise. And if he has a missed flush draw, then he is more likely to... we get more money from that because he's obviously not going to call with nothing, but pretty likely he bluffs, and especially on the ace, which is a card that he can rep very well if he is aware of that. Also, I think that when the river completes the flush, he's a lot less likely to call down with 2x. And he calls with ace-9. Here's another hand with a very similar line. I flatten the big with king-5 suited, check call with weak top pair, and here I believe this hand was played against a fish, so I lead the turn to get value from draws and weaker pairs that'll check back, but basically always pure to a lead, and then the river basically completes all of those hands. So I think if he has Jack X, there's a pretty good chance that he's going to fold with obviously the double paired board and the flush completing. So I elected to check the river because I think he's going to bet his 10x, he's going to bet his king x, and I think that a fish would generally bet his flushes here as well. So I think that, like, if he wouldn't bet a flush and he would call with a jack, then I think leading would be better. But given that we don't have that info, I'm making the assumptions that he is going to bet a 10 anyway. He is going to bet a flush. And he might not call, he probably won't call a jack to a lead of a good size anyway. So I shove the river. And he pays off with aces. So here we have a very deep hand. Deeper than heads up sit and goes generally. I was playing deep stacks. I like to sit regs in these a lot, but the concepts still apply to shorter play. So I flatten the big blind, check call with my king high on the flop. The turn checks through on the 4 straight, and the river completes the flush. So again, this is a spot where I expect him to bet his straights on the turn and a lot of his flush draws. I also have a lot of 2x and flushes here myself, and it's a pretty my perceived range again is pretty strong here. My perceived checking range is pretty weak, so I think check raising in this spot is again a good play, because especially when he bets half pot's generally like pretty weak, and it gets the fold. So onto the last hand here. I flat, check call with ace high plus a gut shot plus a backdoor. Turn comes the 2, giving me the flush draw, and the river comes a king, giving me the flush. So again, I check. It's a spot where if he has a king, he's going to bet it anyway, so I'm going to get more bets in with a check raise. Same goes for a flush. Same goes for a trickily, is that a word? Trickily played 2. Trickily played 2. If he has 2x, he's going to bet that anyway. So check raise and just going to get more bets into the pot. And again, it's a spot where my perceived range just looks extremely strong. Leading is not going to get any credit for being a bluff, and I don't think he's going to really like call 3x to a lead or anything like that. So I think check raising is going to be best. And when he pots it, he's pretty likely to just have king x or a flush or 2x and just stubbornly call it off. So I check shove, and he has queen 5, which is quite retarded. So anyway, yeah, hope you liked that video. If you have any questions or hands you would like commented on, post them in the comments or PM me on headsupsitandgo.com. If there's any other concepts you would perhaps like to see addressed, again, contact me. Otherwise, thanks for